First of all, I have to say that you can go into this variation from two different order of moves. It can arise from Scandinavian e4, d5, d4. So when they don't want to take on d5 and play this gambit. Or they can play this variation from the order of moves d4, knight f6, knight c3 that can go to Veresov system. And when you play d5, when they go with e4. And of course here it's a little bit different because in this variation you have two options: taking by knight on e4, which could be even my advice in many of these positions, or taking by pawn. But generally speaking, you don't have to avoid any of these lines. It's considered to be good for black in theory. Anyways, since I tried to teach you how to play Scandinavian Portuguese system, I believe that we should face, and we can actually face, this gambit from e4, d5, d4 order of moves. Of course you should take, and when they play knight c3, you just go with knight f6. And here they just go with typical Blackmar-Diemer Gambit with f3, but they can also go and play bishop g5. Since on f3, I just want to teach you a variation with the bishop f5 where you defend this pawn on e4 and develop your piece and get a hold of center and e4 square. Another thing could be bishop g5. In case of bishop g5, you can just go with bishop f5. So bishop f5, where you hold the center and the e4 pawn, and bishop f5, you can just go into the main variation after f3. So I just want to remind you, if in case of f3, bishop f5, they play bishop g5, you will always, because they threaten to take on f6 and to take on e4, play knight bd7. Develop your piece, get like these flexible knights, and if they ever capture first on f6, you recapture by knight and hold e4 square. Same thing happens here. So if they play bishop g5, you once again go with bishop f5, developing your piece, holding pawn on e4, and preparing to face any f3 with the knight bd7 variation. I just want to remind you that in case of bishop g5, bishop f5, knight g on e2, with the idea knight g3, it doesn't change absolutely anything. You'd go with e6, knight g3, and you pin this knight and get like full control of e4 square. That's what happens. In case of bishop g5, bishop f5, and queen e2, I face this very often in blitz. People like to go with this cheap trick, queen b5. It doesn't even win the piece, but it looks way more beneficial for white than it actually is in practice. So they just threaten queen b5 to take the pawn on b7 or bishop here. Anyways, after knight bd7, long castles, e6, you once again manage to keep the pawn up, and of course if they play f3, you always take, play bishop e7, and you have an easy game. How to play afterwards? You just play short castle. You play c6 in order not to allow them to, I don't know, somehow open this game with some d5, and then you go with your queen on a5. Game is nice, you're up a pawn, and your pawn structure and king safety is absolutely solid. So after d4, d takes, knight c3, knight f6, f3, we just have to play bishop f5. Smerdon, whose name I mentioned a couple of times in these videos, says it's definitely best to take on the gambit. I also think that this variation with the bishop f5 looks like the most perspective way of creating this system, even according to the engines. That's the first choice. But apart from bishop f5, I can just suggest to go with e takes f3. I remember teaching a couple of my students this system where you take on the gambit as well with e takes f3. And here they have two options. They can take by knight, or they can take by queen. Taking by queen is highly risky. And I even believe it's very suspicious move. we should definitely take on d4. I usually divide all variations on good ones, where you just have to learn ideas and plans and how to play, generally speaking, those positions, and bad ones. For example, this is one of those, let's just say, bad ones, because here you just have to learn your variations and learn how to punish your opponents if they play this gambit where they sack 2 pawns already. After bishop e3, queen g4, you just want to trade the queens off. If they trade the queens, that's the end of the game. Queen f2, you once again chase this queen away and force the queen exchange. If knight f3, a very nice move, knight g4, to win the bishop pair, and they're just dead. Or in case of queen d2, you just go with bishop d7 in order to play knight c6 and long castles. You're up to pawns, and all you have to do here is just to use a bit of your defensive skills and finish them off. In case they play knight f3, there are, like, once again many options, but I like bishop g4. And when they play h3 to swap up this bishop for the knight, play c6 and play e6. Playing c6 and e6 is part of your plan. Then you want to go with knight bd7, bishop e7, and short castle. I analyzed this position a couple of times, and a couple of my students won their games. They have some sort of, let's just say, compensation because of the bishop pair and open e and f files, but let's be honest, with the proper defensive skills, black should be just fine here. And just because of this, I can suggest this variation with bishop g4, bishop f3 as well. But if you ask me which variation do I prefer the first one with the bishop f5. Once again, if they go with g4, you play e6, g5, knight e5, bishop d3, bishop e7, and against h4, knight b4, chasing this bishop away and getting like slightly better game for black. When you play bishop f5, now they have two options: to go with g4 or to go f takes e4. If they go with g4, that's main variation. You just, I'll go get back to this variation. I first have to show you what happens if f takes e4. Of course, you take by knight. And here I believe the problem is not knight f3, but the problem is queen f3. If knight f3, you just take on c3, complete your development. I don't see anything better for white with bishop d3. You play bishop d6. That's kind of important move, because when you capture back by e pawn and take like nice control of e4 square, you just go with castle and you just have a slightly better game where you're up a pawn. In case they go with queen f3, that could be a bit of a problematic, and this is where you just need to learn your analysis in details. So let me just show you what you have to do there. So after queen f3, you just have to go with knight takes c3. Now they have two options: to take by to take by pawn on c3, or to take bishop. I believe taking by pawn is not a problem. You play e6, they take on b7, and you play knight d7. It's nice. You give your pawn up back for the activity and for the sake of, I don't know, some initiative and tactics afterwards. So in case they go with knight f3, you go rook b8, sacking another pawn and playing bishop c2. According to the analysis, black is just easily better in this type of game, because you have development advantage. Queen on a7 looks pretty bad, and they have king stuck in the center. In case they play bishop d3, so instead of knight f3, if they play bishop d3, you go with one of the most beautiful continuations, rook b8, and after queen a7, you just go with the line bishop e4. That's a beautiful move here, because in case they don't do anything, you just go rook a8 and trap this queen on a7. In case they take, you go with queen h4 and win the bishop back. And in case they don't do anything, you just threaten to take on g2. So it's fantastic refutation of this line, and that's why I told you this variation requires some precise theoretical knowledge. And after knight c3, if they take on f5, you just get an important tempi and bring your knight back to d5. For example, queen d3, knight d5, and you want to play c5 next. Same thing happens if queen g4, knight d5, and if they play just developing move, you also play developing move, followed by c5 next. But you don't even have to play c5, you can play even more solid with c6. Doesn't matter your up opponent, all you have to do is just to show some decent defensive skills. All things considered, when you play bishop f5, you just have to be afraid of g4. You play bishop g6, and h4 should be met by h6. And in case they take, you take. They go here, you take. You play e5. Great move, once again, for full activity, and definitely great black pieces and their initiative. So you just go with 97. And finally, if they go with g5, you go 95. They can take on e4. Actually, they should take by this knight, and you have two options. You have e6 and e5. I believe e5 is a good move in... actually, that would be my recommendation here, because when you play e5, you just go in a gambit fashion against this variation. Also, look at the white king; it's pretty exposed. And look at these pawns; they're just broken, and I don't like white's position. After d takes e5, knight c6, you want to get the pawn back, but it's not because of that. You maybe want to go with bishop before short castle. You want to maybe go with queen d7 long castle. It depends. If they play h4, you take on e5, h5, bishop f5. Look at this. We have three minor pieces in the center. Otherwise, I, for example, played once a blitz game, queen e2. I played queen e7, where I don't only defend the knight on e5, but I also prevent queen b5 because of c6. And after bishop d2, I went for the long castle. I easily killed my opponent, and because activity was on my side. And after knight c6, if bishop c4, chasing away this knight, bishop e4, it's nice. You take on e4 and you sack on c3. Who would say that you're so good in this position, but actually you are after you play this beautiful queen d4 move. Everything is collapsing in their game. King is weak, pawn on e4 is weak, rook on h1. And on the last move and last attempt to come up with tactics, because if king f7, queen b3, or queen f3, you just go this king e7. Everything is just weak once again in their position, and black seems to be a lot better. Thanks, and see you next time.